What are you going to do? We don't have boots on the ground. We wouldn't have boots on the ground. But we do have a big stake.
States set forth his position regarding the cessation of hostilities and the truth. On my behalf, that Russia also wants a peaceful resolution of the Ukraine crisis. By the way, contacts between the participants in the Istanbul talks, they resumed, so this gives us hope that overall we're headed in the right direction.
Time for a short break now. More news and updates on the other side.
When facts are fragmented, we put the pieces together. Where power collides with truth, we are there.
Behind me is that massive security arrangements that are in place.
Behind fractured boundaries, we clear the fog of war. Fault Lines with Gauri Dwivedi, only on NDTV World.
In today's interconnected world, India's voice is more crucial than ever. When India speaks, the world listens. At NDTV World, we are that voice, bringing you intelligent and insightful news from India and beyond. From geopolitics and diplomacy to economic shifts, migrations, tech disruptions, and the stories of our diaspora. We cover the news that shapes our global future. NDTV World, your new home for global news is here.
From interesting tech startups to industry-leading companies, politics, sports, culture, curry, cricket. Oh, there's so much to talk about. Like me, if you too thrive on interesting conversations, this is a show you cannot miss. Watch this space to know more about all matters and all people that make Britain what it is today. Out of Britain, with me, Radhika Iyer.
You are watching the World 24/7 on the NDTV network. I'm Parmeshwar Bava. We've got an action-packed bulletin lined up for you with news from across the world. Let's begin with the top headlines you need to know. US President Donald Trump and Russian leader Vladimir Putin failed to reach a breakthrough on a Ukraine ceasefire during a 2-hour phone call on Monday. Trump, though, struck an optimistic note, saying Kyiv and Moscow will immediately begin negotiations. China has announced plans to fast-track a flagship dam project in Pakistan to support its close ally, weeks after India suspended the 1960 Indus Waters Treaty following the deadly Pahalgam terror attack. The first few aid trucks entered Gaza following nearly 3 months of Israel's blockade of food, medicine and other supplies. Mr. Netanyahu, though, said that Israel would control the whole of Gaza despite mounting international pressure that pushed it to lift this blockade on aid supplies. The United States has announced that it is imposing visa restrictions on owners, executives, and senior officials of travel agencies in India for knowingly facilitating illegal immigration to the United States. The US House Budget Committee has voted to advance Donald Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which would make sending money back home more expensive for thousands of Indian residents and non-resident Indians living in America. Britain and the European Union have struck a landmark deal to remove some post-Brexit trade barriers and to bolster cooperation on security and defense as they reduce their reliance on an unpredictable United States. Well, our big focus, US President Donald Trump and Russian leader Vladimir Putin failed to reach a breakthrough on a Ukraine ceasefire during their 2-hour phone call. Trump, though, struck an optimistic note, saying Kyiv and Moscow will immediately begin negotiations, while Putin's more guarded comments signaled that he hadn't softened his maximalist demands. European leaders, meanwhile, were reportedly stunned after Trump briefed them on the call. He indicated an unwillingness to exert more pressure on Moscow and suggested that Washington could step back as a mediator in the war. In fact, a leading Russian expert has said Putin has devised a way to offer Trump an interim tangible outcome from Washington's peace efforts without making any real concessions. Nina Maria has more for us from Washington, D.C. But first, listen to what Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin had to say.
Did you ask President Putin to meet with you?
About what?
About Ukraine.
Of course I did. I talked to him about it. I said, when are we going to end this, Vladimir? I know him for a long time now. I said, when are we going to end this bloodshed, this bloodbath? It's a bloodbath. And I do believe he wants to end it. You know, when I made the call, I told the people last night, I spoke to the heads of the different countries. But I said to them, we got to get going. And I did say also, if I thought that you couldn't do it, I'd step away, because what are you going to do? We don't have boots on the ground. We wouldn't have boots on the ground. But we do have a big stake.
States set forth his position regarding the cessation of hostilities, and the truth, on my behalf, that Russia also wants a peaceful resolution of the Ukraine crisis.
Well, US President Trump sounding extremely optimistic on the back of his phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin. I don't think that President Trump can afford at this point in time not to sound like there's some forward momentum. He said last week that nothing would happen until he and President Putin had spoken. So in the very narrow scheme of things, that's a mini triumph. It's a mini victory. But it's also possible that President Trump believes that by injecting the right tone, it gives the lack of progress a kind of a shiny wrapper on a rather disappointing parcel. Since there has been no movement, we know that there's been no progress, there is no ceasefire, nothing's really changed, except that President Putin and President Trump have spoken. President Trump referenced on the back of that phone call with President Putin a possible trade angle, and we know that trade and investment deals are very much President Trump's thing, which, given the fact that he is capable of injecting a degree of chaos into trading relationships with partners, it does seem counterintuitive. But given his track record of cutting deals, especially if you look at his latest trip to the Middle East and the deals that he's been cutting with Gulf states, it's certainly a language he speaks, the language of trade and investment, and a number of foreign governments are lining up to offer President Trump deals in the hope of better preferential treatment. In particular on Ukraine, defenders of the minerals deal say that it's crucial to securing Ukraine's post-war recovery, that it gives Ukraine sovereignty over its natural resources, and the US on the whole sees critical mineral supply chains, whether or not critical minerals are really there in Ukraine or not, as a way to move away from China. Trade incentives for the US with Russia, a little bit harder to decipher, given President Trump has to strike a balance between sanctions and a transactional relationship. But worth saying that European allies, however divided they might be over Ukraine at times, do not share President Trump's tone of optimism coming out of this call. Nina Maria Potts for NDTV in Washington.
Well, for an expert's view on the matter, joining us this morning, Daniel Block. Daniel, always a pleasure to have a chat with you and have you on NDTV. Trump, in typical style, says the call went very well. But are there any concrete signs that negotiations between Russia and Ukraine are actually about to begin? Or is this yet another diplomatic mirage?
I think this is yet another diplomatic mirage. Now, it's worth noting there have been conversations between the Russians and the Ukrainians going on, and it led to some prisoner swaps. So there is some diplomatic communication between the two parties, but the word I think you used at the beginning, which is right, is typical. We've seen this play out now since Trump has taken office. He has some interaction with Russian President Putin. They have a conversation. Trump comes out, he declares some kind of victory. He says that we're moving closer to peace, and nothing changes. Right. The war goes on. And I see no indication that that's about to change now.
Meanwhile, Putin still insists on addressing the root causes of what he calls a conflict, which many say is code for control over Ukraine's sovereignty. Has there been any indication from the Trump administration about what they're willing to entertain or compromise on?
Well, the Trump administration has sent out so many conflicting signals about what it's willing to entertain or compromise on that it's really hard to discern. I think you're exactly right, though, that we have a situation where what Putin wants is control over most of Ukraine. That's his end goal. That's his desire, and he's willing to fight on until he gets it. And that's really why we're not seeing any momentum toward peace. For Putin, peace is capitulation by Ukraine. It's conquest, de facto or de jure. And obviously that's something that the Ukrainians are never going to accept. And so long as those are the two demands, there's not going to be any peace between the two parties, no matter how hard Trump or his administration tries to finagle or negotiate some sort of ceasefire.
And a quick also pulse check from Washington, Daniel. How is this call being perceived inside Washington's foreign policy circles? Is there relief, skepticism, or is there concern about what Trump might be promising in private?
I think it depends on the circles. So there's obviously some very pro-Trump foreign policy circles where, for lack of a better phrase, the president can do no wrong. Right. And I think in those circles, there's continued excitement and continued celebration about the diplomatic contact between the United States and Russia. Maybe some hope that there will be momentum that picks up and leads to an eventual breakthrough. But I think among the foreign policy mainstream, as it were, among most foreign policy commentators, analysts, and former practitioners, there's skepticism and a sense of dread. A feeling that this isn't going to go anywhere, a feeling that we're no closer to peace, but the war will just grind on, and that all that President Trump is doing is slowly sacrificing American credibility and in some ways weakening America's partnerships with its European allies. Right.
Well, given Trump's unpredictable diplomacy and, on the other hand, Putin's strategic rigidity, we will wait and see if any real breakthrough is possible here. Daniel, as always, thanks so much for joining us on NDTV. Meanwhile, let's turn our attention to Mr. Netanyahu's latest moves. The Israeli Prime Minister allowed minimal aid to enter Gaza, saying that he had to prevent mass starvation for practical and diplomatic reasons. Netanyahu said that Israel will take full control of Gaza, while acknowledging that the move to let aid through was motivated by mounting international pressure from allies. But the United Kingdom, France, Canada, they've threatened sanctions and demanded Israel stop its military actions, while the US President Donald Trump's administration has launched a behind-the-scenes pressure campaign. This is as per the Washington Post's latest update. Meanwhile, on the Iran front, the Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has said that his country would keep enriching uranium with or without a deal with world powers despite ongoing negotiations over its nuclear program. So Iran currently enriches uranium to 60%. That's far above the 3.67% limit set in the 2015 deal, but below the 90% needed for a nuclear warhead. Tehran maintains its nuclear ambitions are for civilian purposes only and entirely peaceful, but this is where it gets crucial. You must note, it also insists its right to continue enriching uranium for peaceful purposes is non-negotiable. And with that, let's turn our attention to the other big story we're tracking. China has decided to fast-track work on a major dam in Pakistan, just weeks after India suspended the Indus Waters Treaty following the deadly terror attack in Pahalgam on the 22nd of April. Now, according to a report by the South China Morning Post, the dam project is seen as a flagship effort by Pakistan and is being built with China's help. The state-owned China Energy Engineering Corporation has been building the Mohmand hydropower project in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province in northwestern Pakistan since 2019. But the project, which was originally set to finish next year, that has now reached a major stage as concrete filling work on the dam has now begun. Meanwhile, NDTV has reached the LOC after Operation Sindoor. We can disclose to our viewers that Indian tanks operated from the LOC. Infantry combat vehicles were on display as well. Before I give you any further details, listen in to this exclusive inside view into what has changed after Operation Sindoor with my colleague Vishnu Shom.
I'm in the broader Akhnur area. I can't tell you where exactly I am. That's classified. I'm on an Indian Army T-72 tank. And what we can tell you in this very special program is that tanks like this and also BMP-2s, which are armored personnel carriers, infantry combat vehicles, were used in Operation Sindoor as well. These were used and brought right up to the line of control, and they took out terrorist incursion routes. They fired their main guns, they fired a host of weaponry. We've heard about the role of the Air Force, we've heard about fighter jets, we've heard about our infantry soldiers, Army air defense, the Air Force's air defense, all sorts of missiles being fired. But did you know that tanks also had a role during Op Sindoor? Op Sindoor, of course, is not over at all, but when we were at the peak of Op Sindoor, what we've now learned is that mechanized infantry units of the Indian Army, armored units of the Indian Army were also deployed right up to the line of control and taking out terrorist incursion or potential terrorist incursion routes. Joining us now, a colonel of the army who was involved in these operations. We can't name him right now, and that gives you an idea of how tense things still are. But thank you very much for speaking to us. It was interesting to learn about the use of BMPs and tanks as well. What was their role in Op Sindoor so far?
So far, see, if I say they were used in a sub-conventional manner. If I may say, they were used for precision targeting and a calibrated response, so that it doesn't happen that the caliber escalation is there. So that's why the targets were identified, which were within range and which had to be hit with precision. So if you can go down, you can see 30mm gun. It is very precise and it can fire various types of ammunition, which can have a devastating effect on the enemy. And thereafter, we have got a missile also, which can hit till around 4,000 meters. So that is why only small portion, if I may say, only a fraction of these equipment were used against the ceasefire violation which the enemy had brought on us.
Well, in other news, amid the major crackdown on immigrants, the Donald Trump administration targeted travel agents in India who are known for facilitating illegal immigration to the United States. The US has said that it is imposing visa restrictions on owners, executives, and senior officials of travel agencies in India for knowingly facilitating illegal immigration to the United States. In fact, the State Department said the owners, executives, and the senior officials of such travel agencies based and operating in India will face visa restrictions so that the smuggling networks can be completely cut off. The statement also said that this visa restriction policy is global and will be applicable to even those who qualify for the visa waiver program. But for an expert's view on the matter, let's go across to immigration attorney joining us from Boston, Alison Kranz. Alison, thank you so much for making time for us. Really appreciate it. Let's just begin with the big announcement. Visa restrictions on Indian travel agency executives. Legally speaking, Alison, how serious is this move? And how unusual is it for the US to target private sector individuals in a foreign country like this?
Well, I think it is quite unusual. The US is looking for recourse. They're seeking to penalize those who are helping to facilitate illegal immigration into the United States. Essentially, the US is reaching out beyond their jurisdiction to try to find a penalty that will deter people from trying to support illegal immigration into the United States. However, I think the key here is knowingly, right? These are people who knowingly facilitate illegal immigration into the United States. So in some ways, this is just a continuation of typical policy that the US has had before, but they are actually this time having an investigation to try to identify who these people are in these organizations.
Alison, what impact do these restrictions then have on Indian citizens that are actually applying for US visas through legitimate travel channels? Will there be any impact, and should ordinary travelers be worried about broader scrutiny or delays now?
Well, what I think the statement didn't make clear is, will agencies accused of facilitating illegal travel have any due process, have any way to be heard and to challenge the accusations against them? Under those circumstances, that might absolutely cancel trips or delay travel if legitimate agencies are accused of bad acts that they haven't committed.
For Indians with family in the US, or those planning to study or work or visit, what is your most practical advice right now in terms of documentation, legal precautions, or red flags to watch for when dealing with agents?
Yeah, I think there's a number of red flags to watch for, right? Watch for promises that sound too good to be true. Okay, look for job offers for jobs that you didn't apply for, promises of guarantees, or side trips. For example, perhaps a trip to Mexico before entering the United States. Those are some red flags to watch for, and perhaps reconsider your travel or investigate further before signing a contract.
Wrap also, Alison, there's concern in India that some people may have been misled or coerced into illegal routes, like you mentioned, that touched down in Mexico. Is there legal protection then, or asylum relief for those individuals if they come forward in the United States?
There may be. There's special protections for people who have been trafficked. There's also protections for individuals who are victims of crime. The U visa and T visa are particular provisions of the US immigration law that allow people to remain in the United States if they've been victim of these types of crimes. Seeking advice from a qualified immigration attorney prior to making any decision or signing any government forms is essential under these circumstances.
Well, some argue that this latest move, it's a sign of a sweeping Trump-era shift towards zero-tolerance immigration policy, even at the expense of diplomatic friction with close partners like India. But whether there's room for diplomatic negotiation here or this is a hardline enforcement, I guess it remains to be seen. But thank you so much, as always, Alison, for joining us with the clarification.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Slipping into a very quick commercial break for now. Back in a moment with the latest updates. Do stay tuned.
When facts are fragmented, we put the pieces together. Where power collides with truth, we are there.
Behind me is that massive security arrangements that are in place.
Behind fractured boundaries, we clear the fog of war. Fault Lines with Gauri Dwivedi, only on NDTV World.
In today's interconnected world, India's voice is more crucial than ever. When India speaks, the world listens. At NDTV World, we are that voice, bringing you intelligent and insightful news from India and beyond. From geopolitics and diplomacy to economic shifts, migrations, tech disruptions, and the stories of our diaspora. We cover the news that shapes our global future. NDTV World, your new home for global news, is here.
Welcome back. Well, imagine being taxed for sending your own money home to your parents, spouse, or children. Well, that's exactly what's on the table in Washington, and it could hit the Indian diaspora in the US in a big way. The US House Budget Committee has taken a big step towards pushing through what's being called President Donald Trump's One big, beautiful bill act. Sounds poetic, right? But it's anything but. Especially for the nearly 45 lakh Indians living in the United States as we speak. So what's buried in this 1,100-page legislative document? Well, the bill proposes a 5% tax on all international money transfers made by non-US citizens. That actually means Indian H-1B workers, green card holders, and even long-term residents who haven't taken up US citizenship, essentially the core of the Indian American workforce, will pay extra every time they send money back home. So whether it's $100 to help out with medical bills or $10,000 for a down payment, let's say in Mumbai, well, America wants 5% off the top. And the math? Well, according to RBI data, $32 billion was remitted to India from the US just in the year 2023-24. A 5% tax on that means $1.6 billion lost to Indian families in the blink of a congressional vote. This isn't limited to personal money transfers. The bill also targets investment income and stock option proceeds, which NRIs often route to India for real estate investments, startups, or family expenses. Suddenly, though, moving money across borders becomes a luxury and not a right. And unless you're a verified US sender, so read US citizen, you're fair game for this tax. Here's where it gets more politically charged, though. The revenue from this remittance tax, along with other funds in the bill, is earmarked for Trump's hardline immigration agenda. So think $46.5 billion to restart construction of the US-Mexico wall, $4 billion to hire 3,000 more border agents, $2.1 billion in signing bonuses, and 10,000 new ICE officers. And the kicker, a plan to deport 1 million immigrants annually. And for the first time in US history, asylum seekers would be charged a $1,000 application fee, placing the US alongside countries like Iran and Australia in monetizing asylum. It's not a done deal yet, though. On Friday, some Republican hardliners briefly blocked the bill, citing overreach. But on Sunday night, it squeaked past the Budget Committee with a 17-16 vote. And the next stop is a floor vote and potentially a law. So what does this mean for the Indian government, for India's central bank, for those planning to go to the US for work or study? Well, those questions are still up in the air. But one thing is clear. The Indian diaspora is staring at a direct hit to their ability to support loved ones back home. Meanwhile, and staying with updates from the US, Commerce and Industry Minister Piyush Goyal held productive discussions with the US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, focusing on expanding the first tranche of the India-US bilateral trade agreement. In fact, that image that you see on your screens at the moment, Mr. Goyal shared it, stating good discussions with Secretary Howard Lutnick towards expediting the first tranche of India-US bilateral trade agreement. In a setback for India's agricultural exports, at least 15 mango shipments from India have been rejected by US authorities at key entry points, including airports in Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Atlanta, due to documentation irregularities. Exporters were given the choice of either destroying the mangoes or bearing the high cost of re-exporting them to India. And given the perishable nature of mangoes and the prohibitive expense of return shipping, all affected exporters opted to dispose of the fruit within the United States, as per reports. Although a United States Department of Agriculture inspector in Mumbai was actually in charge of this entire procedure to check, at least 15 shipments of Indian mangoes were refused because of paperwork issues related to mandatory processes. This is what reports have highlighted. Exporters assert that the fault actually lies not with them, but with administrative errors. But the exporters, as I mentioned, have chose not to re-export the cargo to India because of the perishable nature of the mangoes and the high cost of shipping. And with that, let's turn our attention now to the United Kingdom. Well, Britain and the European Union have struck a landmark deal to remove some post-Brexit trade barriers and to bolster cooperation on security and defenses as they reduce their reliance on an unpredictable United States. The agreement is a significant reset for the two allies, you must note, because the agreement is designed to help the two sides work more closely together. After the Trump administration signaled it was reducing its commitment to European defense and imposed global tariffs. Listen in to Keir Starmer's reaction.
Today we have struck this landmark deal with the EU, a new partnership between an independent Britain and our allies in Europe. This is the first UK-EU summit. It marks a new era in our relationship. And this deal is a win-win. It delivers what the British public voted for last year. It gives us unprecedented access to the EU market, the best of any country outside of the EU or EFTA, all while sticking to the red lines in our manifesto about not rejoining the single market, the customs union, and no return to freedom of movement.
And finally, American director Wes Anderson has mocked Donald Trump's plan to impose severe tariffs on foreign-made films, suggesting it would mostly financially hit filmmakers like him and be unworkable in practice. Listen in to his remarks.
I thought you were going to say he was giving us a plug or something. I was like, Trump, did Trump see it? The tariff, you know, the tariff is fascinating because the 100% tariff, I never heard of a 100% tariff before. I'm not an expert in that area of economics, but I feel that means he's saying he's going to take all the money. And then what do we get? So it's complicated to me. I also think, does it mean he's good at, like, can you hold up the movie in customs? I feel it doesn't ship that way. So I just don't know. I'm not sure. I want to know the details first. So I'll hold off on my official answer.
In 2003 is when Munna Bhai MBBS happens to you.
Right.
Dr. Asthana. And then in 2009 is when you become virus in Three Idiots. And then you make a directorial venture through Mehta Boys.
Right.
It has been quite a journey.
Yes.
But these two characters were particularly those which are seen as iconic. Would you say that they reshaped your entire, acting career?
You're absolutely right. People identify me with these two characters. I have had a learning curve through a lot of other characters too, but yes, there's no denial that these two, and if I might be allowed to put in one more, was Khosla Ghosla Khurana. Because, and you're from Delhi, right? And
From interesting tech startups to industry-leading companies, politics, sports, culture, curry, cricket. Oh, there's so much to talk about. Like me, if you too thrive on interesting conversations, this is a show you cannot miss. Watch this space to know more about all matters and all people that make Britain what it is today. Out of Britain, with me, Radhika Iyer.
Hello and good morning. Welcome to Breakfast Show. I'm Radhika Ramaswamy joining you from Mumbai studios. We also have Divya Vadva joining us from Delhi. Divya, NDTV reports from forward posts on the LOC showing how Indian soldiers have been thwarting Pakistan's actions. Nasir Masoodi is bringing us all the ground details from LOC.
Right, we'll also have, Vishnu Som reporting from LOC. Nasir joining us at the moment. A very good morning, Nasir, to you. Of course, covering, the front areas, the forward areas, the frontline areas. And also we'll get you that conversation that Trump's had, a 2-hour-long talk with Putin. And he's gone on to announce a ceasefire between the two countries is expected at the soonest. However, we haven't heard from Putin or Zelensky, while Sharmila Tagore and Sivi Garewal make their graceful debut at the Cannes. Let's get you the headlines. NDTV reports from the front lines. These are Swadeshi weapons that stunned Pakistan and India's robust counter-infiltration grid.
24 hours to go for the first all-party MP-led delegation to head abroad. India pushes for action against Pakistan. Government to brief MP delegations starting today.
And the Foreign Secretary, in its briefing to the parliamentary panel on Operation Sindoor, well, Vikram Misri has asserted that there was no third-party involvement, particularly the US President Donald Trump had no role to play in the ceasefire, and that there was no nuclear signaling from Pakistan.